document is what we've just been through. 100mm icons, that's just showing you those icons that were embedded InDesign files. So we know that we can embed Photoshop files and Illustrator files, but you can actually nest InDesign files within each other as well. It's just another file source. Just so you're aware, you can nest InDesign files. And we've done that in a moment on the templates, and I'll explain that in a second. Going back to that folder, data merge demo, I'm going to show at the end. Fonts, just some of the fonts that we used in that workshop document. Grids and templates examples. So the guidelines documents that I showed you and the Forgotten People's designs PDF. So basically, when you work with a publisher, if you work with a publisher, excuse me, as part of the design process, you don't just get given the book and that's it. It's quite a long process, the project cycle. You are brought in my case, I did a lot of work with Lawrence King and Thames and Hudson, and you design a BLAD, a B-L-A-D, book layout and design. And what that is, in effect, is a sample of the book. So it might be the opening section, a chapter or a few pages of a chapter, and a kind of synopsis. So it just gives a flavor of what the whole book is going to be like, visually as well as content. So it's a taster. That BLAD then gets taken to book fairs around the world. So Thames and Hudson would have a stand in a book fair, and then they would sell it, basically sell the idea, and based on the amount of interest from booksellers, distributors, bookshops, etc., they could quantify how many that they would want to print as the first run. And the BLAD was really the kind of tool that did that. From a design point of view, what's really good about the BLAD is that it forces you to make all those decisions up front. So when the book is commissioned, you're just creating the book. You've made all those decisions. You've got your style sheets in place. You've got your colors. You might then have to create more versions of. So, for example, the maps. In the BLAD, I did 2. For the actual book, it ended up being 16. So, but the styling and the kind of approach that you are going to bring and the aesthetic that you're going to bring to the rest of the book has been established. So, it's a great process to go through. But that process from doing the BLAD to getting the final book might be a year apart. It might be 9 months apart. It all depends on the cycle of the book fairs and when the book's ready to commission and when they want to sell it. So in Forgotten Peoples, you've got a few versions of the BLAD, basically. So there's a full color version and a duotone version because they weren't sure what they wanted to commit to in terms of printing, because it has obviously, depending on if you're printing full color or printing in 2 spot colors per section, there's different costing. So they were kind of working out what the economies of scale were. Again, that's all dependent on the number of books that are printed at the end of the day. Anyway, it's all there for you to sort of dive into. I've also then just I've also included a chapter from, I've lost the fonts because it's on the Mac, but again, this is more for you to have a document to play around with in terms of swapping out style sheets. So I've got different header style sheets, body copy. This was a book called Biomimetics, which is basically how we are inspired by nature in industrial design and design generally. So it's a really great book. Anyway, so that's just an InDesign file that you can, again, make and break and just have a little play around with, so you're not having to set one up. You can use it as a kind of test bed. Again, just wanting to see how typefaces work together, you can use that as a tool. What else do I want to do? So coming back to here, I'll explain that in a minute when we dive into the template. And then books. Let's crack on with books. So in InDesign, you may have noticed when you've been playing around with InDesign, you can kind of come up to here, you can go File, New, and you've got Document, Book, and Library. So library is something else. It's just about kind of connecting across applications. But book seems quite, I don't know what I'm saying there, that's fine. So book opens that tab, that's all it does. And you're like, oh, okay, now what? So with book, you can populate book with lots of InDesign documents. So you can drag them in or you can add them in here. You find them and you add them in. So I've set up a book, which I have called Portfolio Master. Okay. So within that book, I have got an InDesign file, which is a kind of generic kind of company introduction. So division, I'll explain the footer in a minute. And then just an opening paragraph, it might be methodology or whatever. What I tended to do is, so just to backtrack slightly, my role in division and Draft Associates as creative director, but I also was kind of the front man. I'd go and see the clients, we'd have the meetings. As I think I mentioned, the way that we like to work would be that we would have a meeting first rather than just sending the portfolio kind of blind. It'd be much better to get an understanding of what the needs of the project were, what the extent of the project was, so that I could come back to the office after the meeting and very quickly put together a portfolio that was relevant to them. It just would mean something to them because we'd already discussed it. And I, in the meeting, would say, oh yeah, we've done something similar, I'll send you that. So, already there's kind of, it's part of the conversation, rather than getting a kind of cold call email saying, can you send through some work, and not having any context. So for us, it was much more about always going and meeting the client first, just to have a conversation, no commitment, whatever. If you want to go with us, no, whatever. It's just part of the process. And rather than us getting the brief from the client, we took it upon ourselves to write the brief back to the client. So after that conversation, and when they were interested and they'd like the work, and we were kind of beyond this stage of sending the portfolio and going on to next steps, one of the first next steps that we would do would be to write the brief back to the client. And the reason we did that was so that we could fully demonstrate that we understand the detail within the brief. And it was then a kind of stake in the ground where they were like, well, yeah, that's almost right. We'd quite like to just add this in or whatever. So it became a conversation, but it also, the brief actually is kind of contractual. You can always go back to the brief saying, well, that wasn't in the brief, so you're kind of adding that. And it becomes a kind of legal document as much as anything. So having the brief and agreeing the brief is really, really important for both parties. You don't just want to inherit a brief because there's assumptions on the side of the client, and you want to make sure that you kind of ironed all that out. Excuse me. So I'd go into a meeting. I would say, okay, I'm your primary contact. Can I please have a primary contact from you, whoever the client was? And the reason for doing that was, and if you're freelance or you're wanting to set up on your own, always insist on a primary contact from the client, because if you are walking into a meeting and you've got 6, 7 people at that meeting, if you don't ask for that primary contact, over the course of the project, you'll be getting emails from each of these people going, I've just thought of this. And it's like, okay. And they'll just have you chasing your tail, you'll be going around in circles. And if you have a primary contact, it forces them to have an internal meeting first, and then you just get the outcome of that meeting. So it gets rid of all the crap, basically, and you just get the feedback, the instruction, and it's been considered, thought out, and delivered. And you have to be quite, not harsh, but you can say anything with a smile. If somebody kind of out of the primary contact sends you something, I've just thought about this, and it's just like, yeah, can you just route that through the network effectively? And you can say that's fine. You can kind of educate your clients as to kind of work out, to deal with their housekeeping before it becomes your problem. You're not there to manage them; they can manage themselves. So, you can kind of insist on that. There's no issue at all. So, primary contact for the company, one primary contact. One line of communication just eliminates a lot of tail chasing, basically. So anyway, that's the intro. I then set up a project template. So the project template is something that I would use for presentations, but I would also then save out a version for the portfolio. So I'll explain that in a minute. I'm just going to ignore that for a moment. So I'm sure you're familiar with pages and master pages. So you can see already, we're starting to use some of our style sheets, paragraph styles and everything within this document. Now, one thing that you will realize, and this is for illustration purposes, just to kind of show you the difference between having kind of a print publication. We would print out our presentations A3 because some clients like to have a hard copy to be able to kind of make notes on or whatever. But then invariably they would like a copy to be presented on screen, and there's a discrepancy. You've got A proportions and you've got screen proportions. So we set up a template that would mean that we could create one from the other effectively. So this grey box just shows you the area of the sort of 16:9 ratio, which is a monitor, a laptop, whatever, a TV screen, and then the A3 behind it. So we just made sure that our template, any content always fell within that. And if we converted our A3 document into 16:9, we would just lose the top banner. And the reason we had the top banner and the space above was because when we printed our presentations, we bound them at the top, so they were kind of flip based rather than down the side. So we had plenty of space, so if we lost it, it didn't make any difference. And actually, we just would lose the footer for the screen version. We would put copyright info kind of at the end on the thank you page instead. So this I've just set up for the purposes of the workshop. Again, you can kind of dive in and play around with it. Now, one of the things to bear in mind is that I've used master pages. So in a similar way where we had style sheets based on, you can create pages and master pages based on. So on my A master page, all I've got is my grey box, just to show you that. And then I've got another InDesign file. So this idea of nesting an InDesign file within itself, I've done that so that I can put the date, zoom in a bit, and just go to display performance. So why have I done this? Well, I can update the footer once and make it specific to that client. And then when I open up the book and the footer updates across all the portfolio pages, I've got the right year. So, I don't have to go into potentially 200 documents, say. If I've got 200 potential entrants into the portfolio, I've never seen the portfolio of 200 pages. But, as you're adding projects and you're building up this master document, you've got that as a basis from which you can then swap out and remove things, which I'll show you in a minute. But if I wanted to update the date across all those documents, I would have to go in and do that. If I put it in a footer and make it a separate InDesign file, I update it in one place, and then it gets relinked to all the other files and it updates. So with that principle in mind, obviously the date is something that would change once a year, but potentially across a lot of templates or pages, projects rather. And then also I would make sure that it had the client name that I'm sending it to, so it feels like I put it together for them rather than it just being a generic thing. This has come out of our conversation, and by adding the client name into the footer, again, that gets updated across all the portfolio pages that I want to PDF. Excuse me. But the project title I just keep within the project because it's relevant to this. So anyway, you've got that, and that's on the master page. Now, I'm sure most people know about this, but I'll just cover it just in case those people don't. This is a special character which deals with page numbering, and page numbering can be automated in InDesign. So just while we're here, I'll just show you. So when you go to special characters, markers, current page number, you've got other options here as well, but current page number. So within the master page, it's fine. It's set to A, which is just the screen representation of that. But if I come to page 3, it updates to 3 to 4 to 5. So no matter what page I'm on, it will always update. That end number, that's just a sort of courtesy for letting the client know where they are within the presentation. It's not entirely necessary. It's just another thing you have to update. Again, that's part of the footer. So I've just put these kind of visual cues to me to state, make sure I update these 3 bits of information when I launch the project template for the first time. So I'm just adding the client name. This would actually happen on the basis of creating the project. And then that would be in the footer as well. So anyway, because I've set that as a master page, I've then just created some other page templates. And if I click on that and say master options, it's based on a master, which is the footer and the gray box. So that's automatically the kind of base setting. Everything's derived from that. So I know in my project template, I will always have a project title. I will always have a project description. So those 2 pages can be in there already. Because these are my templates, I can always add in my sort of next steps and thank you. And that's my template specifically. If it's my business partner, he can swap out his. And again, it's just always in there. So every time I want to add something new or create a new document, I just launch the project template. So obviously this can be a bit more exhaustive. I've just created it for our purposes here. So you can add into this, you can use this, break it, whatever. So I've got a mood board, I've got if I'm designing a logo, I've got a big logo here, I'll show it in mono here, for example, maybe give some further information about its influences. The point being, all of this is derived around the template, using the guides, using the style sheets, everything that we've discussed so far. So when we look at the book and the master document, on a sort of day-to-day basis, when I put a presentation together to send to somebody, that's fine. I can export it out as A3 and get that printed. If I want to create a screen version of it, the PDF that I print out, I can then drop into my A3 to screen converter. And all this is a document that I've pre-prepared, and I only have to do that once. And I don't know how many pages I did it to the end. Ultimately, it could be up to whatever. I've done 29 pages, but you could do it to 100 pages and just delete the ones that you're not using. But what this is doing, in effect, is importing that print PDF and then just cropping it into a page. So I don't need to paste it into each one. All I need to do is come to that PDF and relink it. With the new A3 exported, it will auto-populate all of the pages, and then I just export that, and then I've got screen version. And just in that quick way, I've now got 2 different formats, one which is optimized for screen and one which is optimized for print. So again, just using InDesign as a tool as much as a design tool. So I'm using it to kind of convert between formats. Coming back to the project. So intro we've seen, project we've seen. So, I might have, let's say for the sake of argument, 50 projects in here that are portfolio worthy. At one point, actually, and backtrack slightly. For the portfolio versions, I would save out a second version of the document, bearing in mind, if this presentation is portfolio worthy, I don't want to have a thank you page at the end of each of these projects, peppering through the document. So Didn't want to dock that. Anyway, pages. So I would actually, where we had that thank you page at the end, which wasn't at the end, but anyway, it would be at the end. I would delete it and then just save a version of this file that was project1_portfolio. So for the sake of argument, these are all portfolio. So now, when I come back from that meeting, I update the footer with the client name. I make a selection of projects and think, okay, well, that's not relevant. So I can, project 2 isn't relevant because that's target audience is children, and this isn't for that target audience. What's going on there? Delete. What's going on? Oh, I think I have to do it. Let me do it this way. Right. Project 2, not appropriate, delete. Project 5, not appropriate, delete. Actually, project 8 is a website. It's more appropriate. I want to put it there. Pages update automatically. I'm moving the documents around. All the pages are updating. Still 1 to whatever, 36. I'm presenting it, so I'm going to get rid of Dave. Actually, on reflection, project 7 is no good. So I've got 30 pages. I know that I need on my footer to put 30 in that page counter. So client name, the date's already updated, add 30, job done. So then I can just select that before I do that, and then I can save that. I don't want to save over. Apologies, it's here. Save book as. I don't want to obviously save over my master book. I just want to create a new book. So that, say, is for BCU, Birmingham City University, which is another place I teach. That's all I can think of. I've used SHU already. So now I've got a repository, which is a way of creating this portfolio. And I'm not duplicating files. They're all referencing those original files. It's all manageable. It's everything kind of links back to that kind of key element and those key elements. So I know there's kind of consistency across the board. And then when I export that, obviously all the page numbers are up to date, etc. It's got the client name, and then I can send that and convert it to screen. Job done. Super, super powerful. But then say, for example, so we're using it in the context of a portfolio, but it's called book for a reason because it's fundamentally used for editorial and book publishing. And why would you split things up? So when you're working on a large title, you might not necessarily be working on your own. I would work with other designers in the studio. And by splitting it into chapters, say, you would kind of split things into chapters. It would just mean that people could work on different aspects of the project at the same time, and you're not kind of locked out because everything's in one file. So that's the benefit of splitting it. It's also better for performance on your machine. You're not, if you're creating a book with 600-700 pages in, you don't want to kind of deal with your machine kind of chugging away with all this content and having to kind of optimize the display, but not really getting a sense of what you're seeing. So splitting it out like this is much, much more manageable. So on a practical level, for books specifically, but we're just kind of adopting that technique for the purposes of a portfolio. So we're just kind of hacking that system for our own benefit. But one thing that you will maybe have thought of already is that each of these documents has its own style sheets within the document. But there are ways of kind of synchronizing all of those documents across the board. So again, this kind of book analogy that we've been using, this idea of adding a line space between paragraphs, for example. I can update that on one document and then use that document as a source. So here you've got an icon to the left of the Indesign icon, and that basically indicates the style source. Okay, so if I come into here, I'll do it on body copy. So for example here, body copy, If I change that body copy to, I'll use symbol again just because it's sort of visually different. So I've updated the body copy on intro. If I open project 8, nothing's changed. Body copy is still the same. So here, if I've got body copy selected, if I now select all of those, so I'm doing it using the portfolio files. I'm using it to illustrate changing style sheets in a book, for example. Or, as a design studio, you might want to make a few visual tweaks to your templates because you've rebranded, so the fonts have changed. You don't mind using the same layout, but you just want to make the fonts fall in line with your new branding. So this would be another reason why you would do this. Having the intro selected, because that's where the style source is, I can just go synchronize book. Before I do that, I'll just show you synchronize options because it shows you the power of synchronizing across documents and all the kind of component parts that you can synchronize. We're just dealing with paragraph styles, but obviously character styles, object styles, all the kind of styling elements can be synced. That goes into tables, cells, maybe for another time we can kind of dive into those and how those all work. Swatches, all your colors, a whole host of things. So I'm going to come out of that. So to implement it, you just select them all and you hit synchronize book. Fine, synchronization complete, successful. So now when I go to project 8 and go to a page with some body copy, I'm opening them all now. So here, project 8, the body copy has now been updated to symbol because we synchronized book. So again, super powerful, but it's just sort of familiarizing yourself with where all this is, so that when you're kind of brought into a team and you're asked to work on a book with somebody else, and it's like, okay, you need to just kind of get orientated, say, all right, well, what are the style sheets you're using? Tell me the structure of those. Are you using any object styles? Having this sort of part of your conversation will just sort of demonstrate your capability and your knowledge of InDesign in this case. But as I mentioned before, these principles carry across all sorts of applications.